Welcome to Hype Hazard, your source for exposing the tech behind the hype. Today's technology landscape is full of buzz and cash, but it's also full of trash.
And in our show, we'll cut through the flash and all the FOMO, helping you navigate the hazardous data conditions ahead and sidestep all of that marketing wizardry in order to uncover where the real opportunities lie.
If you're a pragmatic innovator, a cautious explorer, or a discerning executive, this podcast is for you. Before we jump into today's tech du jour, let us introduce ourselves. I'm Jessica Grootman.
And I'm Jamie Szymanski, and we are technology analysts and founders of Kaleido Insights. We have spent our careers researching new disruptive technologies and how they impact consumers, businesses, and society at large.
We have seen all too much garbage and BS along the way, but also a lot of gems that have truly changed life and work for all of us. In Hype Hazard, we'll share our decades of experience with you, dear listener, to help you understand new hyped up technologies for what they really are.
And spoiler alert, they're typically trash. And with that, let's dive in. Today, we're talking about social audio, or as you may know it most popularly by example and by all of the recent press it's been getting, Clubhouse. So what is Clubhouse exactly? Clubhouse is a mobile app. It is only available on the iPhone right now, and it is only available by invitation. It's a social networking app that's audio only. There is no other type of content shared, barring a little bit of side chat and some of these other apps that have been created on top of Clubhouse. But it is an audio-only app, and it has about 10 million users at this point. On the app, people gather into audio chat rooms. Like I said, there's no other type of content shared, just voice, to discuss various topics. You can create your own room or you can join another. And rooms are divided by who is leading the conversation. It can be multiple people, and then who has access to talk. And people can be muted throughout the duration of the room. People are listening, people come and go as they please. Permissions can change as people are speaking. And typically these rooms are created by experts, industry leaders, or influencers in their field. Now, the conversations that happen in these rooms, they basically disappear after they're over. And if we could call it the nuance of basically, more on that later. So don't expect the luxury of playing back anything that was said in the room after you leave. So think of it like basically a podcast, but with the option for participation. And much of our conversation today will center on Clubhouse, as that's squarely where the hype needle is pointed. But the larger technology grouping is called social audio. So you might hear us use that term too.
Our colleague Jeremiah Aoyang has called this the Goldilocks medium. Ideal for when video is too much, too cumbersome, requires too much ready, but when text is too little and you really need that voice interaction.
We've all had Zoom fatigue. So I think that's, part of the reason of the hype that I'm sure that we'll cover here is, you don't have to have your video on, and that's pretty fantastic.
And so we have a lot of social media, right? So what is all the hype about? What's so different about voice or an audio-based social network? Why are people raving about this? Well, many reasons. Needless to say, we are obviously hungry for human interaction these days, perhaps a little more so than usual than historically. Many parts of the United States, anyway, are covered in snow. We are, in many cases, still in quarantine, and businesses are not functioning in the social or public spaces they traditionally have because of the pandemic. So there's a kind of ripe cultural moment or societal environment, if you like, for going online, but also for human interaction and for the natural emotion and the range of intonation and delivery that comes through in an audio medium that doesn't in text or even video sometimes. But most importantly, there's so much hype here because of this kind of exclusive, influential, early adopter user base. Clubhouse has started by invite only. And so this has created a kind of influencer network of venture capitalists, of Silicon Valley techies and marketers, of kind of cultural influencers. Oprah was on the platform, Kevin Hart, Tiffany Haddish, all these people, right? But in addition, it got a huge boost around the time that Elon Musk joined the platform. This was also around the time of the GameStop Reddit event or debacle.
That's still raging. I mean, I didn't know if you saw that, but it's still going on today.
On and on and on. And the Bitcoin price continues to rise and rise. Right. But in many ways, there's sort of this confirmation bias for that invite only experience where you join a platform of like-minded early adopters. Again, it's invite only. You're sharing that platform with other, what's not to like? It's sort of folks
or you can even buy an invite. Have you seen this, Jess? That you can buy one on eBay for up to $125. And it varies based on who's invited you because that shows up on your Clubhouse profile. So you might want to pay more,
Jamie, do you have better ways to spend $125?
I think I could get one share of GameStop if that's what you're saying.
But so here we are, right? This is sort of symbolic of this exclusive factor, this buzz factor around it. Now, there's another piece here, which is another piece that's driving some of the buzz that I think is interesting and fundamentally different than kind of the early adopter demographic we just talked about. It also has gained a sizable following in China. And we know that the government, the censorship, relationship to the internet is very different. It's very much a matter of government approved sites, right? But suddenly Clubhouse, as is often the case with these early apps, gained a big following there as people were beginning to talk about really sensitive subjects in China, Tiananmen Square crackdown, what was going on and is going on in Hong Kong. And that in and of itself caused a lot of attention and, sort of surprise globally until the Chinese government blocked the app. But that also really pushed it into the news as well. And as we know all too well here in the land of unicorns in Silicon Valley, the Clubhouse, despite today having no business model, and despite having, at the time of valuation, just 2 million registered users, is already valued at over $1 billion. So zero revenue is made, $1 billion, no Android version, invitation only. So we have some big hype on our hands here, Jamie.
I agree. And I think that although they don't have any apparent business model right now, what we are seeing, which is also some of the hype, are all of the apps that are building on top of it. I'm not sure if you checked out even just Product Hunt lately in terms of what is being done on top of Clubhouse right now. Everything from analytics software that is being built to automatic note taking to even, making sure that you capture the high points from conversation, although it is against Clubhouse's terms and conditions to record conversations. But as you may have seen, that's not stopping people from doing so. Beyond that, I would add in terms of the hype is that it is spontaneous. It is low commitment. And the fact that, there is this lack of paper trail, sort of.
Sort of.
It makes people feel as though they can let their guard down and perhaps have more interesting conversations. And, as you alluded to earlier, our other business partner, Jeremiah Aoyang, has talked a lot as well about the fact that it feels addictive in that way because you can just hop around from room to room and listen in and you feel like you're part of this exclusive sort of eavesdropping. You don't have to, contribute if you don't want to, and you can learn from a lot of other people and be exposed to new, viewpoints that you normally wouldn't have. Right. So I think that's also some of the big hype here. Beyond the hype, which is what Hype Hazard is about, we have to discuss some of these hazardous conditions ahead. So I kind of feel like a kid in the candy store kicking this section off because it's like, where do I begin with the issues presented by Clubhouse? Will this be the first part of a 10-part series?
We promise we won't make everything.
Right. You will get other technologies, listeners, along the way. But I feel like the most appropriate place to start is data privacy or lack thereof. I mean, one of the most flagrant things that I noticed when I first created my account is how hard they push for you to connect your address book of contacts so that they can use it for their contact recommendation engine. But the interesting thing beyond that is at first I thought, well, I probably shouldn't do this. But, for purposes of research, if nothing else, I connected my contacts. But apparently it doesn't matter because if you are in someone else's address book, you automatically are put into Clubhouse's database, your phone number and your name. You have no way to opt out. And then once you have created your account, there are also a complete lack, and I mean non-existent, in terms of a lack of privacy controls at the user level. And this has made people believe, they assume that their conversations are private. And this capitalizes on this sort of dangerous naivety of user base and consumers at large. And I mean, it started out, as you said, when you kind of discussed the hype a little bit, Jess, it started out as a mostly tech-related community, as much of social media has. In the beginning, early days of Twitter, for example, it reminds me a lot of that feeling, right? Where you have this like-minded tech community that first kicked it off. But now we have, a lot more users that have joined that don't maybe understand what's going on in the back end in terms of what's happening to these conversations that they're having in these rooms. They assume it's private and they assume it's deleted. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it's against Clubhouse's terms to record the conversations. They say they can boot you out if it is done. However, they have such poor end-to-end encryption on the back end. And they have the ability, because of that the conversations can be streamed elsewhere. Did you see this? It just happened a few days ago, Jess. It was reported in Vox, as well as a couple of other places. And the Stanford Internet Observatory confirmed that Clubhouse was streamed from one of the private chat rooms onto a public website that anybody could listen to the conversation that was happening. Right. It's pretty wild. And of course, they shut it down immediately, but it just did everything in terms of press to expose all of these vulnerabilities in terms of how their platform is run. So I think that's just one of the biggest privacy things that we're seeing right now that people don't realize.
It's a big one.
It's wild,
right?
It's
a big one. I mean, the other piece too is, to the extent that we have data protections, we are lacking sorely here in the United States, but we obviously know of the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe, GDPR, the e-privacy legislation. And Alexander Hemp, who's a privacy expert, wrote an analysis of Clubhouse, finding that they are flagrantly violating these existing data protection laws. And by the way, Clubhouse is not, as I mentioned, China, but it's not a US only app. This is an app that's being used all over the world. So they should know better, particularly given the experience of the founders and investors behind this. As we look at, social media 1.0, 2.0, and perhaps we can call this whatever, I don't know what point we're on now, but the next generation of social media with audio, we should be learning some lessons here. And so, as the internet has always been a sort of giant copy paste machine or a screenshot machine, as you just mentioned, per that article, the same tech, capabilities are still possible. And so we need that kind of safeguarding that is just not in place today.
Absolutely. Of course, right now, like you said, it's violating countless data protection laws outside of the United States. And unfortunately, the US has always been quite behind in terms of protecting consumers and our data, but they know that they're violating it. And they've done nothing in terms of course correcting. You've seen, I'm sure, a lot of the press that they've put out that says, okay, no, we're aware of these security vulnerabilities in terms of our user base and their data, and we have a plan, but there has not been one thing that's been outlined of that plan. Right. While in the meantime, it's been widely reported in a few different popular publications that, in the back end, the SDK, the software development kit behind Clubhouse, is a Shanghai-based company, Agora. And it's interesting to see, because a few different reports have said that this would allow, perhaps Chinese government access to some Clubhouse user data, as well as the ability to theoretically tap that audio, and record it through Agora's network. So it doesn't mean any of it's actually happened, simply that it's possible, right? And so if our data in the US of US users is being routed elsewhere, I think that at the very least, there should be that transparency in terms of how the data is being collected, used, stored, etc. We are big proponents of data stewardship, as we call it at Kaleido. Absolutely. So this is a little bit, to put it nicely, a little bit worrisome in terms of how data is being. It's just a little. Beyond the data privacy concerns, though, honestly, right now, when I say it reminds me of the early days of Twitter, it's not only because of data privacy concerns, it's also, there's this sort of, how do I say it nicely? It's sort of a bro-y startup culture energy. Very the tech bro culture, a little bit of the hustle culture on there too. So I think that could be an initial, draw for some people, but a very large turnoff for others. As well as now I see that as it's being open to the public, It's kind of feeling a little salesy, when you browse some of the rooms and it being promoted in other feeds that I see on social. You have a lot of the multi-level marketing or the MLM Huns that are on there and other sales fleets just ready to pounce on you, all fueled by that, so-called power they have of being on an exclusive network.
Exactly. And again, with the echo chambers, it's funny because as we've talked about, there's a really rich community and indeed a user strategy around influencers. If you're scrolling Instagram and you see an influencer, okay, you might pause, but of course the rest of your content is padded with friends and family or whatever. Stuff you like, food for us, right, Jamie?
But we're both chefs, imagine world renowned. Just so our listeners understand that.
Right. The other day job. But imagine like all influencer content and all of this, like I am a kind of an expert on this topic. I'm going to, share with you the most important things to know, the top 5 this, top 5 that. Guess what? You're going to get in on these early investments, right? Like this kind of content as the predominant experience on the platform. A big critique that I have, not just for Clubhouse, but for all of social media right now is kind of the squeakiest wheel gets the grease. And this is, that's a nice way of saying it, but the loudest one gets the microphone. And so part of this kind of who can actually speak and who cannot. I was talking to someone the other day who said, on Clubhouse, it quickly feels like if you get one of these people who just talks and talks and talks, it's not a conversation. It just becomes a filibuster.
Oh God, right?
And so
they're not listening. They're waiting for their opportunity to talk. That's one of my favorite.
Not to mention they can actually control who else can speak. But this is not just sort of tiresome for us who get, tired of listening to droning on, but also has major implications for misinformation, right? For unmoderated harassment or unmoderated disinformation for that matter.
Absolutely. That's another point I wanted to touch on too, Jess, that there is zero content moderation at this point, unless the person who has actually created the room or, the event decides to mute you or kick you out. There's no other content moderation. So conspiracy theories, racist rhetoric, hate speech, etc., have really flourished unchecked on the platform, which is one of the hugest hazards in thinking about the future of Clubhouse that they really need to get under control, because they can't go back over transcripts as easily as you can in other forms of social media because it is all audio. Now, Clubhouse does say that they record conversations and keep them, I think it says like an hour afterward to see if there were any violations of their terms and service. But honestly, the whole process to even report this is so cumbersome, if even existent at all. And these rooms on Clubhouse, they have a max capacity of 5,000 people. And that can get very, very messy depending on the topic that's being discussed and who is allowed to speak. I mean, some of the rooms, sure, it's, to your point, Jess, it's a lot of influencers just passing the mic, which is there anything worse anyway? I'm not sure. But whereas other rooms, it's, if they set the topic and it's a conspiracy theory about anything. I mean, the most common one that people are reporting now are about COVID-19 vaccination. And if the conversation can just, be left to its own wiles there, who can moderate it, and then what comes out of that could be very disastrous indeed for Clubhouse as a platform. And related to that too, honestly, I think that it was really interesting. I was reading an article earlier this week on Vice about what these Clubhouse rooms do in terms of the type of conversation that they encourage. Since it is so fleeting and being social audio conversation, psychologists show that it encourages what's called fast brain responses. And those are responses with little thought when you are in a highly emotional state. So combine that with,
what could go wrong?
Combine that with some of these, topics that are being discussed, as well as repetition and hearing the same bullshit over and over again. That leads people to think that this misinformation is in fact.
I mean, we must talk a lot about misinformation and disinformation, but let's call it untasteful. Just a couple days ago, I saw a room called "Are You Wifey Material? Let's Ask the Men."
Oh, brother.
Great.
Wow.
Just what we need.
It's interesting. It's like, I really will be curious to see what they decide to do in terms of content moderation, right? When rooms are allowed to be that big, there are no official Clubhouse moderators. nothing can go unchecked. I mean, God, how many years has it taken for Facebook even to step up and moderate content in an appropriate way with the right technologies? It's taken forever. So Clubhouse is experiencing all of these same growing pains of other social platforms when it comes to misinformation and content management, but all in the, what time span of, what is it, 8 months, 9 months, something like that.
Right. Some things need to change, to say the least. And, what's really interesting here is I keep thinking about social media as we think of it today, the big tech company social media, the Facebooks, the Twitters, et cetera, of the world, and kind of what's different here. What are they mimicking either inadvertently or on purpose? But also where are the real opportunities to actually make a difference here? So we've touched on today the perils of the attention economy. And this is really my biggest critique of Clubhouse as it is now. It's just yet another extension of grabbing attention with the loudest, most viral prone, extreme, as you mentioned, the sort of fast brain responses as being the currency of this kind of medium. And so, again, this question of whose voices get heard. Now, maybe there is an opportunity here to see the medium of audio as a real opportunity, because we know, and actually many studies have shown that voice has a humanizing quality, that it reveals what text, conceals, that it actually can be much more thoughtful and emotional. And so, I don't need to tell anyone in the world, certainly in this country, that we're struggling to communicate. We're struggling to talk about difficult issues. We're struggling to find a middle ground. The attention economy has polarized our society on the basis because of, as we know, the most extreme, the most hateful content spreads the fastest. What's the Mark Twain quote? A lie is spread halfway around the world while the truth is still getting its shoes laced up, right?
Right.
And so this is, to me, the most powerful opportunity for audio forums like Clubhouse is, can we use these for real conversations in ways that when you're collectively focusing on a concept through an audio medium, it's different than text, it's different than image, it's different than video. It requires a different kind of focus. And again, it has that emotion, that real time, that synchronous experience of a conversation that is just not possible on a text-based or visual-based social media. The big question I have, and it's a concern right now, I would ask rhetorically, what's worse? Not being an ad-driven business model, which, by the way, is the predominant business model for the attention economy, or not having a business model at all?
Well, both for them, require a little bit more of strategic thinking, it sounds like. I think they're just happy to be so popular right now and have a user base growing so quickly that they haven't even considered either of those things. I think ads aren't far behind, though. Really, how long did it take for a medium like Twitter to end up with sponsored advertising? And I think that we'll see the same thing on Clubhouse too. But I love your point, Jess, to sort of bring this full circle. We spend a lot of time in Hype Hazard talking about the hazardous conditions of different new technologies and the disruptions that they bring. But in reality, I think that the promise of Clubhouse is in the community building and in the like-mindedness. And that's where I think, a lot of our listeners, that if you're leading those sorts of efforts of change within your organization, or even considering social audio as a consumer, that's where the promise lies to me. It's a place to be heard, expand your perspective, and connect with people you might normally not in real life. The access component has been a huge draw, sure, in the beginning, right, with all of these, A-list celebrities that are joining it and things like that. Great. Yeah, you would love to be in a room where Elon Musk pops in to say hi, sure. But in the future, what's considered a celebrity might be someone who's important in your social circle or in your industry, and you'd have access to them in different ways. Other groups that you might feel shy in real life to join or to learn more about, you could just drop in and hear that live conversation. So, but in order for any of that to happen, I feel like we can't, wrap this up today without really being clear to say that moderation is necessary from Clubhouse's side in terms of what these conversations encompass and what the topics of the rooms are and what people are saying and harassment claims and all that sort of stuff. So I would love for them to see, whether it's human moderators or, AI, machine learning based moderation. And then also obviously the data privacy issues.
Right.
I mean, at the very least, end-to-end encryption should be this foundational standard to play right now and offer real models of control over your data and privacy. I was just floored that there was nothing. Like I said, even if you don't consent to them looking at your contacts, it doesn't matter if someone else already shared your contact.
Exactly. And why, again, privacy is a social issue fundamentally.
Yep.
And, I would just add one more point on this piece of access, where today the strategy is clearly exclusivity. The trend in tech has to be towards inclusivity. We have to get more people on board here. This can't just be the tech bros of Silicon Valley. Just as one, and an interesting differentiation, social media companies like Twitter and Facebook are also going to be mimicking Clubhouse, creating the audio feature into their platforms. But Twitter announced, we're going to include conversation transcripts so that way everyone can read them, whether you're deaf or anything else. And also, I mean, yes, Clubhouse is a young company, but we got to get beyond just iPhones. I mean, there are billions of people in the world who simply can't access this because they don't have an iPhone. So
I did see some promising news yesterday. They hired an Android developer, which signals that hopefully, I know it will be available for Android devices, which, yes, opens the doors globally much wider than just iPhone only. And then, I'm excited for it to lose some of that sort of exclusivity that breeds a different type of, I don't know, an air of superiority that is just rampant on the platform right now.
We have plenty of divides. And so let's try to mitigate that, not, continually add fuel to the fire.
Absolutely. Well, and with that, Jess, I say it's rating time. Okay. So listeners, every episode we will end with giving the technology we've discussed a rating. The ratings go from trash, splash, cash to smash. So Jess, what do you rate Clubhouse?
All right. After much deliberation and setting my cynicism aside, but also optimism, I'm going to call this cash. Okay. Cash is our rating for, this is a moneymaker, but it's quickly going to become a copycat. It's already a copycat in many ways. Once the other large social media companies create their own, I'm not convinced yet that this capability, which right now is a platform called Clubhouse, doesn't just become an embedded feature into a voice interactive internet.
Agreed. I mean, I think we're seeing that right now with Twitter, which is why I actually decided to rate it splash, which means it is hot now, but it is fleeting. And I think the fact that Twitter has already developed something pretty similar and Facebook is on its way, that is what makes Clubhouse fleeting. To your point, it will be a built-in feature on social networks that are already existing where your entire network is there. I think that in the meantime, though, there are a lot of reasons that we could also be calling it trash with its data privacy policies, but I would say splash for now. Jess says cash. And with that, I think that we call today's conversation a wrap. Join us, please, listeners, for the next Hype Hazard, where we will continue to explore and expose the tech behind the hype. And in the meantime, feel free to check out all of our content at kaleidoinsights.com. Until next time, thank you for listening.
Thank you.